had a really wonderful presentation last night by Yogeshwar Prabhu, kind of gave us an introduction to the whole concept of hero's journey. And we've got three very distinguished panelists who I'll introduce in just a minute, who are going to help us explore this question of the call to adventure, how it comes, how do we respond, how do we take advantage, what are the fears sometimes that come along with that. So I did a little bit of research. I'm learning a lot myself in this whole understanding of hero's journey. I'm finding it really, really informative. There's multiple versions of the hero's journey from the research that I did. And some of them say there's 12 steps to it. Some of them say 5. Remember, those of you that were here last night, Yogeshwar put some drawings up there, and some of them looked somewhat simple and easy to comprehend. And then he showed a second one. It looked like you needed a master's degree to kind of work your way through the different steps that were involved. So there's different analysis of this hero's journey, but all of them had this same phase, the call to adventure. It seems this is a really critical aspect of it. So this is one of the ones that we pulled out, the devotees that were planning this weekend together. We pulled out as something that was essential, that really needed to be looked at from a Christian conscious perspective. Sometimes they describe in simple terms, the hero at this stage begins a situation of normality from which some information is received that acts as a call to head off into the unknown. Radhika Raman talked about this earlier this morning, US morning time. Often this journey is represented, or the call, by a distant land, a forest, a kingdom underground, beneath the waves, above the sky. We would say out of the universe, right? The call comes from out of the universe. And the hero then can choose to go forward, or sometimes says, I don't know if I can do that. And I think we see sometimes in our devotional lives, the call to adventure came and we said no. And then it came again, perhaps, and we said no. And eventually we say, okay, I'll give it a try. And a lot of times it's because Krishna, out of his mercy, kind of has the other options fall out of our lives. I heard this in a conversation that I had with Yugal Kishore the other day, and he's going to be sharing with us in a couple minutes. So this call to adventure comes. How we respond to it as devotees, and of course, particularly we're looking here as men, is such an important thing for us to look into. So let me introduce our panelists. We got 3 devotees, all 3 of whom I consider very good friends. And although some are younger than me, I would say that I would also consider them mentors to myself, because they've inspired me in so many ways through their friendship and through the examples that they set in their lives. So not in any particular order, all 3 are exalted personalities. The first member of our panel I want to introduce is His Grace Caitanya Prabhu. Many of you know him, a little bit of a background. He actually did electronics and telecommunications engineering degree from the Government College of Engineering in Pune. Most of us probably do not know that. He served as a software engineer for some time at a multinational software corporation. Today, as a devotee of ISKCON, he travels all over the world, from Australia to America, and he gives talks at various places, including different universities such as Princeton. You might recognize some of these names: Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, and Cambridge, and companies such as, again, some of the small ones, Intel, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. So he's gotten around a little bit. He's the author of the world's only Gita daily feature, where he writes a 300-word reflection on a verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and you can find those. Maybe we can put this, Caitanya Prabhu, while I'm speaking, maybe you can put it in the chat. You can go to www.gitadaily.com. It's a really wonderful inspiration. He's written many, many articles. He's one of my favorite authors for the Bhakti Gita magazine. I always get the BTG and flip open to see what has he written on this time. It's the first thing I like to read. And he's been published in a lot of different newspapers in India and other places around the world. His books and his writings have been translated into multiple languages, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in his spare time, he wrote 25 books. So that's our first honored guest. Secondly, we have with us Madhvacarya Prabhu, who lives in Washington, D.C., where I am. Took a different route in life, as he describes it. He was born into a tough neighborhood in Baltimore. Those of you that know the city of Baltimore, it's got a few tough neighborhoods within it. And yet he went on, was educated at Johns Hopkins Medical School in Philadelphia, was trained at the George Washington University Hospital in Washington, D.C., which is where he first met his future Diksha Guru, His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Maharaj. He heard him on a radio program in 1990. Madhvacarya Prabhu went on to be an anesthesiologist. Those of you that know anything about medicine, that's the person. If you're gonna get surgery, don't just meet your surgeon. You need to meet the anesthesiologist, because the surgeon's job is to whatever put in or take out a kidney. The anesthesiologist's job is to keep you alive while the kidney's going in and out. So good person to meet and make sure that they are competent, and he is one such person. After he met His Holiness Bhaktitirtha Maharaj, he was initiated and then married to his lovely wife, Kunti Devi, in 1991. And since 1995, in addition to his medical practice, his home has really been a preaching center and an outreach center, I think a spiritual oasis for many, many people in Washington, D.C. area. He's one of the few householders I know where I don't really think he's the householder. He's taking care of the house for the people that come there to get spiritual shelter. You come to my house, my apartment, day or night, I promise you the door is going to be locked. And if I don't know you're coming, you're going to find the door remains locked. That's just the nature of my hard-heartedness. He is exactly the opposite. His door, his home is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and devotees go and they really take shelter of him and his wife and all the Sangha there. So a wonderful person. He's also raised two handsome, intelligent, bright stars in our youth, among the youth in Washington, D.C. So his whole family is wonderfully Krishna conscious. So we have two brahmacharis with us on this panel. The next one also originally hails from India, but now is a very important leader in North America. Although he's brahmachari, he's taken up the call to adventure of actually leading and managing a temple in Farmington, Michigan. That's Yugal Kishore Prabhu. A little bit of background about Yugal. He was trained as a software engineer. He came to America and had a job working for MetLife in the United States. Many of you know that's a big insurance company. I spoke with him a little bit the other day to get a little background. I was surprised to learn that he was chanting 16 rounds and following all of our regulated principles before he was initiated, with no intention to get initiated. He just did it because it was the right thing to do while he was working outside. And at a certain point in time, a crisis came in his life, and a call to adventure perhaps, and a little deeper realization about the fragility of life in this material world. And he did a complete flip and just said, okay, met life, goodbye, ashram life, hello, and never turned his back again. He was in New Vrindavan, one of the leading preachers and caretakers of visitors in New Vrindavan for many years. And then he was called to Farmington, Michigan, where he worked with the community there, developed a wonderful temple that opened just a few years ago. So we have three special speakers with us this morning. I want to say it's still morning, actually it's early afternoon my time, but I do want to emphasize, particularly out of deep appreciation for Caitanya Prabhu. He's in India right now, which means those of us that follow the time zones, it's about 1 o'clock here, but 10 and a half hours. It's what, 11:30 at night in India. So Caitanya Prabhu, I'm going to probably direct a few of our questions to you first. And then if you fade out, fall out of your chair, or have to head off to take care of your body after nurturing our minds, that's to be understood. So welcome to all three of you. Thanks for being here with us. And I think we'll go ahead and have all of the four of you can unmute yourselves. I'm going to ask a few questions. We've got a little more than an hour together. I want to ask some preliminary questions, but I'm hoping we really kind of can get into a conversation here. And I want to start with Caitanya Charan because I just like the way he thinks. He thinks about things. Every time I have a conversation with Caitanya Charan, I think, oh, I never thought of it that way. So Caitanya Prabhu, I want to start out with this question. We're looking at, in this section, the call to adventure within the hero's journey. So what does that mean to you, the call to adventure? What are your thoughts about that in terms of, as a devotee, as a man, as a human being? How does that, someone who made a complete change in your own life to take up spiritual practice in a serious way, what is it? What are your reflections on the topic, the call to adventure?
Thank you, Prabhu, first of all, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to share something over here. And I don't deserve your kind words, but I see them as encouragement and instruction for me. Now, regarding the specific topic of the call to adventure, I think of it in three terms. Since my childhood, when I was one, I had polio, so I was physically very limited. So I never thought of adventures in physical terms much. But for me, adventures were more in intellectual terms, not in spiritual terms, but more in intellectual terms. Reading, understanding, explaining. So I had a lot of faith in the power of knowledge, power of education. And I felt that knowledge could empower me. And by knowledge, by sharing knowledge, I could empower others. So I always thought of adventure in terms of gaining and sharing knowledge. And before I was introduced to Krishna consciousness, for a brief time, I was a part of a social welfare organization where I used to teach kids free tuition classes on math and history and English and stuff like that. And I loved that. But I noticed that people were quite, these kids were from economically deprived families. Most of them had domestic violence. The fathers were alcoholics. And the fathers were not bad people. But the kids told me that when they drink, they just become like a different person. So at that time, I felt that how much am I really helping these kids by teaching them these subjects when their homes are so dysfunctional? So, and I noticed that this was not a problem with these parents, these fathers who were semi-educated or uneducated. I could see even in my hostel, I was in one of the better colleges in India, even in my hostel, there are kids who were, I could see ruining their careers or at least hurting their careers by their own self-destructive habits. So it was different in terms of externals, but it struck me at that time, many incidents, I don't want to go too much into that, but it struck me that education, or because material education can open doors externally for us, but there's something inside us which stops us from walking through the doors, which actually blocks us, sabotages us from within. And that's when I discovered the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita. I started studying it, understanding it, trying to live it according to my capacity. And I found that same self-destructive force within me decreasing. I started sharing the Gita knowledge with others. And I found that they were also helped. So for me, in that sense, if we consider knowledge to be adventure is in terms of doing something exciting, doing something empowering, doing something transformational, then for me, the idea was receiving and sharing knowledge was what would be adventurous. But what is the knowledge that actually transforms? That is spiritual knowledge. So for me, in that sense, trying to understand and apply spiritual knowledge and share it with others is what I see as the adventure of my life. And of course, that leads to many adventures, traveling and meeting different kinds of people. I could go into specifics, but I find that as long as we have a particular conception of adventure, this is what adventure means. It means maybe going up, climbing up a mountain, or playing some adventure sports or something like that. Then we severely limit the possibility of adventure in our own life. But if we are open, then even if we are open to the idea that adventure may come in our life in many different ways, then even an ordinary seeming activity where we are just sitting and speaking with someone, sometimes some people come and ask me difficult questions, and then when I answer, I'm able to give a satisfactory answer, and I can see their eyes light with understanding. I can say that there are few things as fulfilling as helping people remove the smog that is obstructing them from coming closer to Krishna. So that's my conception of adventure in bhakti.
That's beautiful. I really like particularly what you say about how if something's going to be adventure, if I heard you right, it can't be an adventure that I defined the box. That's not really an adventure. But an adventure means I need to be open to something really new and something that could be very different and outside of whatever my box is. I'm willing to stretch myself this far. That means I'm really not stretching myself. So thank you. That helps. Madhvacarya, I want to go to you next. the call to adventure, I'm curious what it means to you, but particularly I'd like to, if you could describe a little bit how the call to adventure came to you, in terms of our, your spiritual practice or other aspects of your life. But, particularly when we talked the other day, and I got a little insight on your background is like many devotees, it has its own unusual twists and turns. So maybe talk about call to adventure, your reflections on it, but share a little bit, if you would, your path and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Hare Krishna. Thank you for your invitation. And it's a real honor to be on this panel with these other amazing, illustrious gentlemen. But in my own case, I was, as I mentioned, born in Baltimore and raised in a Baptist church, in a traditional Black Baptist church. And when I was a teenager, maybe a junior in high school, 16, 17 years old, my oldest brother, who was a very intelligent man, became a member of the Nation of Islam, or what we know in America, what we call the Black Muslims. And he was very articulate and quite a good debater, and we would have long discussions on religion, and I couldn't defeat him. And that was a really important moment for me, because I was raised in this, traditional, conventional family. And for me to leave the Christian church and try something completely different was a big step for me. I can remember praying about it and really asking God to, show me which is the best way for me to go, what's the best path for me. So I took that was the first call, that first leap out of, a conventional paradigm to something that was totally different to me. And once I took that leap, then kind of following my my natural spiritual inquisitiveness was easier after that first leap. And so I became a member of the Nation of Islam. I was a Black Muslim. Just a little history. It was led by a gentleman named Elijah Muhammad, who left the planet in 1975. After that, the nation kind of dissolved into a lot of confusion. And then I became interested in traditional African religions. And then that kind of morphed into more of a Black liberation theology in America. I took on an African name, Sundiata, who was one of the great kings of Mali in West Africa. And then from there, I was introduced to Taoism, and I studied Taoism for some time. And from there, I was introduced to yoga, Kundalini yoga. There was a gentleman by the name of Muktananda, I believe, from India. And then he was succeeded by a young woman, Guru Mai. She was very popular. They had an ashram in California and in New York. So I was doing Kundalini yoga and going through my medical education. I was actually a fellow in critical care medicine at George Washington University. And then I happened to hear the voice of my future guru, who was Bhakti Tirtha Swami, on a radio program being interviewed. And it's not that he said anything earth-shattering, but he was just so logical, practical, and insightful in his presentation. And it really sparked my curiosity. And I went to see the devotees at a meeting at Howard University the next week. And at each step, the presentation was just, very convincing. It made complete sense, and it was in sync with something within my heart. It made sense, it connected, and it was easy for me to just kind of follow step by step from there.
It's interesting, as you're describing it, I'm hearing that, starting with your brother who challenged you, here's the adventure. And you said, okay, he defeated me. Let me do it. I don't know where it's going to end. I don't see that, it's like call the adventure. Part of it is like that leap of faith that Kierkegaard talks about. So you stepped in, and then he led you to the next adventure came, and then the next adventure came, and the next adventure came. And at each one of those, you were willing to open that door. I don't know if we'll have time to get into it at this point, but I'd be very curious to find out later, because you're a married man. At what point Kunti Devi came? Did she get connected to you when you were the Black Muslim or the Baptist? And how was that for her? But we'll take that up maybe when we have the Grahasta Ashram conference, and not the men's ashram. But thanks for sharing that. Yugal Prabhu, I'm really curious because As I understand it, I mentioned a little bit, here you are, this young man, this, bright-eyed, came from India, very diligent, working as in software for a big corporation, making lots of money, maintaining a nice, pretty pucka lifestyle and feeling pretty comfortable. What happened that now you're, there you are with your beautiful tilak and your shaved head, and you're in Farmington, living in a small room someplace, I'm sure. What was that call to adventure for you, and how did you respond to that?
Thank you very much for inviting me for this wonderful program. My obeisance to everyone, and very grateful to be with you all. And it's a privilege, actually. I'm an Indian, quote unquote South Indian. Maybe I liked watching adventurous movies, but when it comes to life, I'm a play safe guy, actually. I'm definitely scared of adventures. So, but maybe at the later part of my life, definitely giving knowledge to others and waking them up from ignorance. Maybe that's what I considered adventure. But yes, I came to America. I used to work in Singapore. Then I came to America. I got a job in MedLife. One day, I was introduced to Krishna consciousness in Singapore. Then one day, from there I got a job in America. I was working 2001, if I remember correctly. I was a practicing devotee. When I opened the newspaper, New York Times, and read, Ronald Reagan fell in the bathroom and broke his hip. And Nancy Reagan, the former first lady, was requesting all the Americans to pray for him. So, wow, when I read this, I thought, actually, I told myself these things. If I go to hospital and tell him, sir, you were a Hollywood star for a few decades, means you had good money, name and fame, and best sense enjoyment. That's what people are looking for in this world, which you enjoyed for a few decades. One thing was missing from your resume. What is that? Power. That's what people want. Once you get these three things, that you are not getting. But you got that later also. You were 2 times California governor, and later 2 times American president. Wow. So honestly speaking, nobody can have this type of resume, in their lives, actually. So I thought, sir, so you have all these things. So think of those good olden days and remember your today's suffering. But Krishna, body is a machine, as per Gita, and hip gives a good support to the body. When that is broken, naturally you go through excruciating pain. So I thought, if I tell him these things, what would he possibly say to me? Definitely would say, fool number one, how much I enjoyed yesterday, it will not compensate today's suffering. That came into my mind. Wow. Yesterday's happiness will not compensate today's suffering. The power, position, sense enjoyment, money, how much you enjoyed yesterday, years, yesterday, decades, when you go through the suffering today, it will not compensate. When that realization dawned on me, then I told myself, look, you came to America to make money. Gita, which I read before, which I already read, convinced me and told me, you're not the body but a spirit soul. It means, because he was born in early 19th century, in his old age, body is giving trouble, this machine. So maybe 30, 40 years later, I will also go through the same thing. That time, whatever money I have in the bank, the name and fame and position and I would have will not compensate my suffering. Birth, old age, disease, and death. Everyone has to go through. But Krishna says, pasyati apasyati. People see but don't see. Wow. So that day, when my body goes through the trouble, all these things will not help me. Means I have to do something else. Then I told my brother, as I said, I was already chanting 16 rounds. I want to try how this life is about, I want to realize myself before my body breaks down. So I told my brother, take good care of the mom. I transferred all the money to India. And I told my brother, take some money, of course, I gave to Nurundavan, but let me tell you, I have a little fear. I cannot imagine my life not having any money. By this time, I was so used to using credit cards, So I know you will
Welcome
not
to
have
America.
money. I'm sorry. Yeah. So now I'm going to, I'm going to join full time next 30 years, not having credit card, no money, but then maybe I'll be abused. I had a little fear. So I told myself I'll try maybe a month, then I'll make this decision. So I was hesitant. Then I went to Nurundavan. I stayed 2 weeks. Then I realized it's late. I should have come long ago. Anyway, better late than never. Then I joined full time. By your mercy,
Thank,
I never looked back.
thank you, Prabhu. It's interesting thinking about Radhika Raman's discussion earlier today. I wonder, to what extent mentors sometimes aren't necessarily giving us happy instructions. It's almost like Ronald Reagan was one of your mentors in that sense, from his wisdom of suffering. Back to Caitanya Charan Prabhu, I'm curious, we talk about, the call to adventure. And then I think as ISKCON devotees, we talk a lot about our mission. So responding to that venture, at least when we reach that point, which all of you have certainly, of really taking up the adventure of, the call of Krishna, the call of Prabhupada, the call of the Acharyas, the call of the Guru. And each of you, as we were thinking about putting this panel together, was thinking that these are three people that really married to the mission, if we can use that term. Two of them are brahmacharis and they're married to the mission. And with all due respect to Madhvacharya's wife, who I mentioned before, wonderful Vaishnavi, Vakunti, he's also married to the mission. So Caitanya Charan Prabhu, reflect a little bit about this. What are some of the challenges maybe that you face? Because part of the reason we want to look at this, it's not just an intellectual exercise for all of us, not minimizing the points you've made about the importance of all three of you analyzing intellectually. But, the honest truth is every one of us listening to this presentation, we're conditioned souls. We're human beings. We have our limitations. We have our doubts. As Yugal was saying, we have our fears. We have our limitations. But we've responded. We're trying to respond to this call to adventure. And there's challenges that come. So part of the reason we want to talk about this is to give each other strength. Maybe I rose up to yesterday's adventure, but I don't know if I'm ready for tomorrow's. But through this association, and I think, wow, Krishna worked in his life and his life and his life, and increases my own realization of faith. So you've really, Caitanya Charan Prabhu, you mentioned you had polio, you got some physical challenges, and yet you're flying all around the world, and you're up at 11 o'clock at night, talking to us in all corners of the world. What are some of the challenges that you've faced in responding to this call to the adventure that you could share with us that might give us some insights on how we can face and overcome the challenges we might face when responding to the call to adventure?
Okay. I would say that there are three different kinds of challenges. One is the challenges in our service, challenges in our sangha, and challenges in our sadhana. There could be many different, but these are the broad three categories. Whenever we try to do any service, we may try to preach, we may try to build a temple, we may try to arrange for some programs, classes, whatever. The challenges related with service. Then sangha is not just association. One of the key things which I feel can make bhakti, or at least it happened for me over a decade gradually, is that bhakti becomes adventurous, or you could say joyful and adventurous, when we have association that is like-minded and nourishing. So in one sense, if I consider these three things, service, sangha, and sadhana, the sadhana in one sense is always going to be a struggle. And it takes effort to do our rounds attentively, to deal with our own the fickleness and unsteadiness of our mind, and that is going to be a conceivable struggle. It's going to be a struggle. I have more or less reconciled myself that it's going to be a lifelong struggle. Certainly there is some taste coming gradually, But I don't see this being exciting and adventurous in the immediate future for me. There are moments of adventure. And even if you look at service also, yes, awesome. There are moments of some wonderful success, wonderful experiences, but overall services also have their challenges. And it's fortunate if we are engaged in a service which is according to our swabhava. But one of the things which helped me to really make bhakti joyful and adventurous was association. So finding like-minded association. What do I mean by, now that we often use the word like-minded association, but I would like to make this a little bit more specific. Like-minded, what does it mean? That means two things, that we all ultimately have the goal of going back to Godhead or developing love for Krishna, which is wonderful. But these are very, you could say, long-term or lofty goals. We also want to do something in the world. We all appreciate Krishna consciousness in particular ways. So I feel that if we can find devotees who share our definitions of success in bhakti. So for example, if somebody likes to study Shastra and analyze scripture and analyze things from a contemporary perspective, analyze and present things, somebody likes to build temples, somebody likes to, whatever it is that we like to do, it's so important to get association which is like-minded. And without that association, we always are, we tend to get caught, at least I found myself getting caught too much in my own internal battles. That, so if we can get like-minded association, then bhakti becomes very stimulating. Bhakti becomes very relishable. And that means not just that we are discussing Krishna Katha and elevated aspects about Krishna. That's wonderful if we can. But even with respect to our services, if we are discussing our concerns, if we are discussing our aspirations, our setback, and if there is somebody with who understands what we are going through, what challenges we are facing, I feel that it not only relieves a burden, it is something which we have to look forward to during the normal course of our life. So I find that is, otherwise there can be loneliness, there can be frustration, there can be guilt, there can be insecurity. And all these in one sense are parts of an adventure. If somebody, just one of my close friends, he went on a adventure trek he went basically mountain climbing in the Himalayas, and he was telling me about the challenges that he faced over there. And apart from the physical challenge aspects, I was thinking that what he was going through, there was fear, there was insecurity, there was exhaustion, and they were together, but they were lonely because each other was trying to climb up. So I thought that something in our spiritual life is also similar. So he told me that what helped me survive was that, I had two people with whom I became very close friends, and that helped me. So I feel that the adventure aspect comes largely to Sangha, because that's where we connect. And the Bhagavatam 11th canto also says that the highest joy that is in bhakti is in relishing Krishna in the association of devotees. So this is not just, again, I said, not necessarily relishing exalted transcendental aspects of Krishna, but exalting our challenges, our successes, our concerns in our attempts to serve Krishna. So that's one thought of mine.
Beautiful. Thank you, that was really wonderful. I'll admit to everybody who's listening in, we're having some preliminary conversations with each of our three panelists, and I was thinking, I'm destined to feel halfway through, we should have just had one person here, because all three of you, we could spend a lot of time hearing from each of you alone, but we want to move around and get a little bit of benefit from hearing from each of you. So Madhvacarya, same question. You've married the mission in a different way. You're a professional person, you're a medical doctor, you've got all the pressures that are there. I mean, I'm sure, you do things that help save people's lives, and you do, and you try to do things to help save people's lives, and sometimes they don't get saved. You see death and life and the challenges and the precipice of that every day professionally, and still you come home and you, as I mentioned, your home's there as a shelter for others. What are some of the challenges that you think you faced within this concept of the call to adventure? What are some of the challenges, and maybe particularly, what are some of the lessons that you've learned that you would share?
Can I tell you a quick story? I'll try to make it brief. So
Please.
when I first started associating with devotees, there was a preaching center in Washington, D.C., and everyone would go and gather there. I was a young doctor. My wife had one child, and she was pregnant with our second son. And like young doctors do, we built a 6,000 square foot house just a little bit outside of Annapolis. When the house was complete, I took my guru. I just wanted to show him the house, and he seemed completely disinterested during the visit. And at any rate, so I showed him, said, this is what we're doing, and of course we're offering everything to you. And so he said, okay, that's nice. Take me back. And so I did. And they were having a dispute with the landlord. And so I went to class one day, and Guru made an announcement. He says, okay, I just want to tell you that in 3 weeks, we're moving into Madhvacarya's house. He made this announcement in class. I'm sitting in the front row, and this was the first time I had heard of it. So I had to go home and tell my wife, who, young wife, pregnant, just moved into a big new house, that this is what was announced. And that's what happened. And we just making the decision to accept that and just flow with it was like one of the best decisions of my life, because it gave me the association of all of these Vaishnavas all the time. And that association is what, as Caitanya Charan was just speaking about, that association is what really helped to strengthen me, to, fortify me. And what it helped me to do was kind of, in terms of integrate my work into my devotional service, in the sense that what I was doing at work in terms of serving patients, I could see them more because of this association as people who were beloved by Krishna, who were cherished by Krishna. And it was my responsibility to try to care for them in a way that would be pleasing to Krishna, because he loved them. And so it helped me to integrate my work into my devotional service so that there wasn't any distinction or conflict. And then, so we were at this house for some years, I think 4 or 5 years. And then Guru made another announcement. So, okay, I want you to move from this house, give this house up, and we're going to move to a smaller place. And so this is a nice place, as I said, it's a really big house, and, close to Annapolis and this and that. But my wife and I discussed it, and she said to me, if we don't move from this house and everyone moves and we stay here, this just becomes a very attractive coffin. Mm. And that was completely correct, because just by staying under the shelter and association of devotees, as Prabhu was just saying, that is life. That does promote growth. Growth is life. Growth and change means you're alive, and it brings its own sense. It's inherently, it brings adventure and makes things interesting and promotes growth. And that's what we want to do: grow and become more and more of a surrendered servant to these amazing personalities, Srila Prabhupada, our gurus, and the great Vaishnavas around us.
I like especially what you said at the end, that growth and change means you are alive. Yeah. Sometimes change, especially those who's getting older, maybe sometimes younger people too, but change in itself becomes a bit of a threat. We, like they talk about, we get in our comfort zone. So remembering that, the fact that if there's change and if there's challenges, that means I'm alive. That's really great. Yugal Prabhu, I'm thinking, one of the things you did not too long ago, you were there in New Vrindavan, and you were, under the shelter of the temple structure and so many things. And you kind of, took off into the wilderness of Western Michigan to develop a community there, to take on the responsibilities of a temple, new temple. That certainly was really responding to a call to adventure. What are some of the challenges that you faced in doing that? And I think it's particularly interesting. That's why part of the reason I like this mix. We've got a brahmachari who's supposed to live simply in the house of the guru, who's traveling all around the world and doing all this wonderful preaching. We've got another person who's married, who's the prototype, like he's got his big 6,000 square foot house he lives comfortably in and makes elaborate deities, and that's it. He's a householder. And then we got a brahmachari who's, again, supposed to be living simply, and he throws himself into managing a temple, in a country he's not born in. And, these are people that really have married the mission and respond to that call to adventures in really unique and I think exemplary ways. So Yugal, tell us a little bit about what are some of the challenges you've faced. I think particularly at this transition, and as a devotee, you told us your earlier story, now moving into taking, it must have been a little, as you said, scary. And, what are some of the lessons and the things that you learned from that call to adventure?
I agree definitely with what Caitanya Prabhu said. With regard to these challenges, I consider first one internal challenges and the challenges with the people you live, and plus the challenges in the service. So internal challenges means as mind, everyone agrees, so difficult to control. And external challenges means especially the people with whom you live, you coexist. And challenges in service. So I think good morning program, good sadhana is a solution to address the internal challenge, especially deal with this crazy troublesome mind, when it comes the second one, external challenge, especially the place you are living, we need to develop nice relationships with the people. Bhakti Swami famous statement is there, these are the people I live with, these are the same people I leave my body, in their presence one day. So it's very difficult to in this Kali Yuga, quarrel and hypocrisy. Alone we are hypocritical, together we are quarrelsome. So if we can address the internal challenges very well and balance our mind, definitely that will help us to deal with the devotees with whom we are living with nicely. Then they will not become challenge, but they'll become your strength. With these two things, when you go to the field of activity, seva, seva, seva means your service, preaching, what of the external world. When you build up inner strength by sadhana and by developing good relationships with the devotees with whom you are living with, you'll be able to address the challenges that you face in the field of your activity, that's preaching. And actually in the preaching, what happens is you give. So when you give, you need to feel it's like a pot. Preacher is like a pot. As long as you're giving, you need to refill yourself. Otherwise, one day you'll be totally empty and exhausted. So for that reason, I definitely in my life, I bank on morning sadhana, chanting the holy name, and plus, depending on the devotees with whom I'm living with, and developing good relationships, even though they may be very young, finding good qualities in them and derive strength from them. Then with this strength from external in the temple, internally from sadhana, and go to your preaching field. And the last point is, we need to count on the blessings of the guru and the senior devotees. That is very important. That's what I felt. When we definitely do what we are asked to do, and especially when we jump into the free of preaching for the pleasure of Prabhupada and senior and Vaishnavas, we receive unlimited blessings by which we step up. We get inner strength. With that, we'll go forward. Actually, that is my experience.
Thank you, Prabhu. Caitanya Charan, I'm noting that it's I think it's midnight there exactly right now, and somehow you're still with us. So we're all very grateful for that. I want to go back to something you said earlier. If I got it right, you mentioned, and I really appreciated this comment, that we all have these lofty goals, become a pure devotee, go back to Godhead, awaken our love for Krishna. And we know sometimes, new devotees, we used to talk about something called a pure devotee syndrome. PDS, and that's all we're supposed to be. Is we just think 24 hours a day about love of God, but we all know that that's for exalted, very exalted personalities. That's not where we are. We are multifaceted people. So then you mentioned that we also need to find devotees who share in our inspiration. And I think I've got it right. You said our definition of success, or you said, or we can get caught up in our personal battles. Explain a little more what you meant by that. Hopefully I captured what you said earlier. We get caught up in our personal battles if we don't have that, people that share in, let's say, more day-to-day kind of goals and aspirations that we have.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu, for that question. And yes, this discussion is so stimulating that I am happy to be here for as long as possible. So, two things with respect to this, that in one sense, we talk a lot about the long-term success, and say in terms of developing pure love for Krishna. But along the way, how are we going to move forward? So what are the things that give us strength in bhakti? So one of the biggest challenges that I have found in our movement, and I'm also guilty of this, it's not that, and I don't think it's our movement, it's just in general human psychology, that if something works for me, say for example, for me, memorizing verses gives me a lot of strength. And I had quite a humorous as well as significant realization of this. Whenever I take darshan of the deities, at least a few years ago, before I became intellectually lazy, I used to memorize verses, and whenever I would pray to the deities, I would memorize a verse and offer a prayer in connection with that verse. And I would really relish that. I would be absorbed in the darshan of the deities. And I spoke that in a few classes. And after that, one devotee came and told me that, for me, darshan has become a matter of great anxiety and tension now. And you are responsible for it. He was saying in a funny, half serious way. What happened? He said, I would just hear Govindam Adi Purusham, look at the beautiful deities and feel filled with so much ecstasy. But you said we should memorize verses. Now I try to memorize verse and I forget the verse. And when I'm taking darshan of the deities, I'm in so much anxiety. Will I remember the verse? Which line I've forgotten? And says all the rasa has gone from the darshan for me now. So what struck me at that time is, it is simple, but just because that gave me strength, that gave me absorption, that gave me taste, doesn't mean that it is going to give others absorption or taste. So shloka memorization while taking darshan is one specific activity. But we all have this. So right now Kartik is going on. And sometimes there's one devotee recently who wrote to me saying that, I feel so much pressure to intensify my bhakti in 15 different ways from 15 different devotees. Some devotees say you should fast more. Some devotees say you should chant more round. Some devotees say you should read Bhagavatam more. Some devotees say you should travel to a dham no matter how risky it is. Some devotees say you should go for a morning program and you should. Now these are mostly householder devotees that are asking me questions. So he says, I feel that Kartik, instead of being a month where I'm remembering Krishna more, I'm in constant fear how many devotees I'm displeasing because I'm not able to do what they're telling me to do. So
what's the lesson? What's the lesson from that you draw?
My understanding is that I have to find out what gives me strength and associate with devotees who also get strength in that. So if I love memorizing verses, then I have to find some devotees who also relish that and discuss it with them, relish it with them. Otherwise, if my strength comes in memorizing verses and somebody else's strength comes in chanting 64 rounds, and then that person will think, what are you doing? You're just being a jnani memorizing verses. So even within bhakti, we have to actually, in one sense, find out what gives us strength, and then find out those who also gain strength from a similar activity. And then we can have that meeting of minds where we actually feel nourished. Otherwise, so the challenge is that if I gain strength by something, I tend to presume that everybody else will gain strength by that thing. And I'm surrounded by people who are in that sense different from me. Then when I am with them, rather than feeling secure, there's one devotee who told me this, it was very humorously but so insightful stated. He says, there are some devotees, when you come in their presence, it is like you have to justify your existence in Krishna consciousness to them. So I think that really takes away the whole adventure aspect from Krishna Bhakti and makes us, so I would say the opposite, the biggest enemy of adventure is the feeling of guilt. If I'm constantly feeling guilty, oh, I didn't do this and I don't do that and don't do that, then there is no possibility for adventure. So, and I feel that,
that goes back to what Radhika Raman was speaking earlier. He talked about that the service of the mentor, and one of the two primary functions is to help them become humble, which may be the guilt when it's not used properly, then becomes guilt. But confidence, that one to be given confidence that I can do this, I can achieve this, that the way I do express myself in Krishna consciousness is pleasing to Krishna, and that I should focus on that and not measure myself against others. I think that's a very important point.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. Humility and confidence. The way I put it is that at different times we need different things in our devotional life. If I am feeling inflated, I'm feeling proud, then I need to look ahead to see how much distance I have to go. But if I'm feeling disheartened, then I need to look back and see how far I have come. So we all in our devotional journey have come a significant distance. So, but if I'm feeling discouraged and I'm told to look ahead, see how far you have to go, then that is only going to multiply my discouragement. So that's the balance, I think.
That's wonderful. Just to mention everybody, we're going to go about another 20 minutes. I've got one more question. That was my last question for Caitanya Charan this time around. Probably, I want to ask go to Madhva and Yugal one more time, and then we'll see if there's some questions from the Sangha. Madhva, we talked about some of the challenges that we face, and you gave some wonderful stories about your experience. That the Guru tells you, sell the house, move here, move there, open the door, and all of that, and responding to that. You're a father of two young men. You also interact with a lot of young devotees, and we're hearing a little bit about these challenges, the importance of service, sangha, sadhana, how association gives us strength. But sometimes, the fact is, I think we've all been in a position in our lives where, it's as Yugal said, it's scary. I can remember when I first became a devotee, I was kind of like the sloth that slowly, painfully withdrew myself from, my materialistic life, and finally got enough guts to, stick my thumb out and hitchhike across the country and eventually move in a temple and all of that. We all have our own stories like that. What advice do you give to your fellow men, especially young men, looking out at across that abyss? Or last night, Yogeshwar Prabhu talked about the precipice. You remember that there was an image, those of us that saw that, there's a man on the top of the cliff looking over. It's scary sometimes. So what advice do you give to other men? Not that you're a superhero, but you're a person who's wrestled with these challenges yourself. You learn some things, and we're here to learn from each other. We're a team here. We're learning from each other as friends and as peers. What advice would you give from what you've learned about responding to that call to adventure?
Thank you for the question.
And Yugal, I'm coming to you next, so you get a minute to figure out what you're going to say. So same question is going to come to you.
In terms of, meeting people who have had some interest in, who have taken some interest in Krishna consciousness and are looking down this path of bhakti and seeing that it presents challenges and difficulties. The first thing I try to think of is just try to present if I can present a good example in terms of trying to relay that it's possible to traverse this path and try to stay balanced. And that ultimately, if you put forth this effort, that the rewards are great. And the rewards are just this, that by traversing the path of bhakti and developing love for God, that you become an agent of positive change in your environment. You become a carrier or via medium of positive change. You become a better husband, you become a better student, you become a better brother or son, or whatever role that you're playing, whatever your dharma is, that you fulfill it in a much more meaningful and powerful way. And in doing that, it brings you ultimately happiness and fulfillment. And that of course, ultimately, there's no other way to experience this other than connecting with that real essence, that loving potential that is our birthright, that we all inherently have. And so we try to present a nice community where there are a lot of balanced people and families and grahastas and brahmacharis, and try to present good relationships that would give some fortification and shelter, and then just present the goal as being worthwhile, and that at each step of the way there are rewards. It's just not at the end you'll be back in the spiritual world, but at each step of the way you'll be more equipped to handle stress. At each step of the way you'll be more equipped to negotiate conflict. At each step of the way you can find some increased happiness in terms of your relationships and in terms of service to others. And this awakens more and more love. It reinforces that, and it's you are rewarded at each step of the way. So it's just not what you get at the end. It can be a gradual rewarding system where you're feeling these benefits of prosecuting this path of bhakti.
That's beautiful. Thank you. It really struck me. You said to be an agent of positive change. And I think the advice I'm hearing is appreciate that you're becoming an agent. And of course, there's ups and downs along the way. Sometimes we may be an agent of positive change some days, some weeks, some months, some years. We may not be such a positive addition, but that we see, we're working our way up. I think that's a really, that's empowering and inspiring. Yugal, let me go to you for just a minute or two, just your thoughts on that question. Then we're going to open up to the group for the last 15 or 20 minutes. What your thoughts on that advice? You talked about the importance of sadhana, how yourself, you take shelter of chanting in your morning program. In addition to the sadhana factors, because you're a guy that had a job on the outside, you deal with people that work in the outside world, you deal with brahmacharis, everybody in every shape, way, and form is in your community. What general advice do you give people facing this call to adventure?
I always ask people, do you have a bank account? Usually they respond yes. So 50 years later, that bank account, that money will be there, but you won't be there. Yes. So life is a triangle. Yes, going back to Godhead is important, but so I say life like this, triangle. Bhagavad Gita will not pay mortgage to your home. So you need to work 8 hours. Madhvacarya Prabhu made a nice point, balance. That's what I throughout my life I've been preaching. So 8 hours you work, to maintain your, material life. But triangle means 8, 8, 8, 8, 3 is 24. And another some hours social life. If you keep on working, making money, family members will be frustrated. They'll be fried. So hang on with family members, relatives, friends, whatever, social life. Today, everyone has good material life. Everyone has good social life. But the third line is missing. Because of that, people have actually, mental problems. Why? The third line is missing, spiritual life. So, yes, we have a body to maintain. We need to socialize so that we can calm our mind. But spiritual life is also of paramount importance. So when you, out of 8 hours, for newcomers, I said 10 minutes to begin with. For serious devotees, Get up in the morning, bathe your consciousness with the chanting of the holy name. Then with that consciousness, you can do the rest of the activities in a very nice way, in a mature way. That is what Bhakti Yoga is all about. So if you balance your life with this triangle, material life, social life, and of course spiritual life does support, and you are showing like this, then I remembered this. How does spiritual life contribute to the social and material life? Very easy. If you're driving on this road, behind the road is like this. So you cannot tell I'm President of America, Prime Minister of India, my left should always go at 30 degrees acute angle. Problems will come. Will come. Then how does spiritual life help? Maturity, patience, wait. Today, no patience. But if you have a genuine spiritual life, it'll give you so much patience and confidence with which you address your day-to-day problems. That is how you balance your social life and material life and spiritual life. That's what I say.
Thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, the emphasis on balance, and I'm hearing also the idea that we don't necessarily have to think we're supposed to, transform our lives overnight. Responding to the call to adventure doesn't mean you don't pay the mortgage. It doesn't mean that you give up everything else that you've learned about taking care of yourself, your friends, your family, everything else. But it means pursuing that next step, and not necessarily, naively abandoning everything else. I want to go to the Sangha now. We talked about Sangha and the importance of it. And before we go to Hari Murti Prabhu, I'll just mention to everybody, I was at a seminar one time, if I can remember how they did it, the coordinator, the facilitator said, yes, please ask your questions, and please avoid a carefully crafted lecture in the form of a question. Sometimes people do that, right? So we want to try to take advantage of the expertise of our and the insights of our three panelists. So Hari Prabhu, you're on. Your question, please.
Yeah,
and
Hare
you're muted,
Krishna.
Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You're very clear.
Yeah, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. My name is Haripad Das. I'm a disciple of His Holiness Bhakti Marga Swami. My question is to Madhvacharya. Prabhu, I have a friend who's an Afro gentleman, and I'm taking him to our Sangha. We don't have a temple here, but we have a meeting place in Cleveland, Ohio. So, home of Bhakti Tirtha Swami, your Guru Maharaj, and I love Bhakti Tirtha Swami. So, my question to you is, what book should I give him? I have given him the book called Book of Eights by Her Grace Mother Krishna Nandini Devidasi. I've run out of ABCs of chanting the holy names of God. He's totally new, this gentleman. So what book should I give him? He's completely new to Krishna conscious. I don't even know if he's vegetarian, but I just take him, I pick him up at a spot and I take him, and he's very interested. He's tried to learn Sanskrit before. That's my question. Thank you, Haribol.
Okay. Hare Krishna, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay.
It's very.
So the books I would recommend, first of all, your association is what's really essential. It's someone used the term bhakti shakti. It's the shakti of your bhakti that really touches someone's heart. But then to give some philosophical foundation to this transformation. I mean, His Holiness Bhakti Tirtha Swami wrote a book called Spiritual Warrior 2. That's been, I think it's a good introduction in a way that perhaps this gentleman could appreciate. The other book that we use here, many books would do. I'm just telling you my own personal experience. Other books are also beautiful and wonderful and effective. But in my personal experience, the other book we use is The Journey Home, as a nice introductory book. And but once again, just your kindness, your patience, your interest and enthusiasm are what really make such a big difference.
I'm wondering if,
Thank you.
while we're waiting for any other questions to come forward, do the three of you have anything you'd like to ask each other, or maybe reflect on some of you've heard from your different panelists?
What Madhvacarya just now mentioned about the personal association being the most important, I find that that is something which, especially when we are having new people coming in, that is probably the single most important element. We can give them books, we can create a nice temple atmosphere. We talk a lot about, especially Western outreach culture and other things. And it's interesting that when we talk about Western outreach, in India also, it's becoming that, especially in some parts of Mumbai, that there are many young people who will not come to a traditional temple at all. But they're interested in spirituality and they need some specific setups for that. But the most important thing is that personal relationship. So I just wanted to reflect on that, that it's something which we need throughout our spiritual life, right from the early stages to be introduced in our bhakti and then throughout. But then as we grow, of course, one thing may happen is that who we can relate with closely may change over the years. It's not necessarily the same devotees who introduced us in the early years will necessarily be the closest to us, or will be the best guides for us throughout our spiritual life. So Krishna can guide us through different devotees at different times. And Krishna can not just guide, but can also offer us friendship, affection, acceptance, whatever we need. I just wanted to reflect on that point.
Thank you. You're asking him to reflect, or that was your reflection?
So that was my reflection on that point.
Okay,
But
good. No, that's good. You wanted him to comment on that?
No, but the point of the different devotees being that we may not always get all the guidance necessary from one devotee throughout our spiritual life. And that's why the idea of, along with Diksha Guru, we have Shiksha Gurus and we have multiple Shiksha Gurus. That's also something which is important. Maybe any of you would like to comment on that?
Radhika Raman actually spoke about that extensively. And Caitanya Charan, now that I made a point of asking for questions, and then we're getting a flood of questions. So I'm gonna go to some that were in the chat box, if I may. This is general question. Any one of you can jump in and respond to this. On the hero's journey, when there are roadblocks, I've noticed myself focusing on the issues, feeling guilty about them, and not having enthusiasm to follow the adventure instead. So getting tripped up by the roadblocks and losing enthusiasm. Any suggestions from your experience how to stand up instead of falling down in those moments? That's a question from Madhvacarya Prabhu. So anybody want to grab that one?
Yeah.
Caitanya, Charan, you go for it, because I've got a special one for Madhvacharya next. So what are your reflections on that? How do you stand up in those minutes where the roadblocks come and then guilt is there? Or Yugal, you want to jump in on that? Either one of you.
Yugal too.
No, Chaitanya, please go ahead.
Okay. So I generally talk about three things. First is that if we consider like our consciousness versus time as a graph, so there are times when we have struggles, the urges that we have, they become too strong. And the urges we have, they have surges. And those surges make it unbearable, irresistible. So my understanding would be, don't define your own spiritual life based on solely on what happens when the urges surge. Sometimes it just becomes irresistible. But after the surge goes down, what do we do in between that time? Say, if at that time I am simply beating myself up, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Why did I do that? Then next time when I'm going to have that surge again, I'm going to be unprepared. I'm going to be weakened and I'm going to fall again. But instead, focus on what happens in between. Maybe during that time, okay, this happened. That doesn't necessarily mean that Krishna has rejected me. Krishna still is as a Paramatma, is still there in my heart. And in one sense, that Apichet Suduracharo verse is there. There are many verses in the Bhagavad Gita. Basically, there is nothing that we can ever do that can make Krishna abandon us. We as finite souls don't have the power to do anything that will make the infinite stop loving us. So in that sense, we can have that assurance and then focus on trying to connect with Krishna and strengthen ourselves. So if we do that, then over a period of time, even when the urges have those surges, we'll be able to resist. But if we define ourselves solely in terms of how we deal with those surges, then sometimes we all have certain conditionings which may take a lot of time to get over. So what do we do at that time? It requires courage to accept our weaknesses, maybe to confess to someone or to acknowledge to others, to a trustworthy guide. But it also requires another kind of courage to accept ourselves with our weaknesses. That, okay, this is how I am, but still, even now, it's not that Krishna is going to reject me. And then once we are focused on this, I don't know what's going to happen after by the urge surges after 48 hours or after 1 week, after 2 weeks, I don't know. But in the intermediate, let me do what I can to strengthen myself. Try to practice bhakti more, try to make my life more sattvic, try to cultivate whatever healthy habits I have. That's focus on the space in between. That's the single most important thing that I would say. And then second is that it's impossible to fight our unhealthy habits by no resolutions. And no, I won't do this. We need more of a yes kind of resolution. Like if it's a wave is coming, sroto ganastamaranam bhaja vasudevam. If a wave is coming, I will say I will not get swept away by the wave. But who knows how strong the wave is going to be? If the wave is going to be very strong, I'll get swept away. So instead of thinking I won't get swept away by the wave, let me try to find out can I have some anchor in my life that I can hold on to and try to tighten my grip on that anchor. It could be my chanting of the holy names. It could be my maybe hearing some kirtans. It could be reading some favorite section from the Bhagavatam. It could be it could be just talking with some devotee with whom I can open my heart and I can talk at that time. So find an anchor and generally tighten the hold on the anchor. So sometimes we hold on to the anchor, still the waves may come, they may hit us, they may shake us, they may toss us away, but if we have held on to the anchor, we'll come back on track. But if I'm just only focusing on I won't fall to this. But we are all in the Bhavasagar, and one implication of being in the material ocean means that we don't know, none of us knows what size wave is going to hit us when. So I may say I have conquered this desire, and this wave is not only in terms of distress. It can also be in terms of temptation. It can be in terms of desire. So I may say I am beyond this anartha. But tomorrow, if a giant wave comes, I might get swept away. So if we focus too much on that aspect, I'll never do this. And then if we end up succumbing to it, then we will think that, oh, my whole life is a waste. I have no willpower. I'm a failure. What is the use of even practicing bhakti? So rather than that, we try to focus on finding our anchor and holding on to the anchor. So if we do these two things, I find that it's not that we are neglecting the gravity of some of our lapses, but that we are not letting those lapses become weaken us. So I'll just conclude with one third point I mentioned, if I don't mind, sorry. This is say, I am here. Krishna is here. And whatever unhealthy habit I have is here. So I am here. Krishna is here. My unhealthy habit is here. My temptation is here. Ideally speaking, my guilt should come here. It stops me from doing what I should not be doing. But unfortunately for most of us, guilt comes here. Guilt comes between me and Krishna. It's because I feel guilty. So I end up, what is the use of practicing bhakti? I made this resolution, I couldn't keep it. So what is the use of practicing bhakti? And if guilt is coming between us and Krishna, then that is pseudo guilt. That is, I would say, Maya masquerading as guilt and keeping us away from Krishna. So anything that discourages us from Krishna, we have to reject it. And we have to find the association which will and not make us discouraged in our practice of Krishna bhakti. So the guilt is important in its own way, but guilt should come between us and our wrongdoings, not between us and Krishna.
One thing I'm learning from this panel is how much we're blessed by having engineering professionals become devotees here, between the triangle that Yugal Kishore was explaining to us and where guilt should lie in our relationship with Krishna. I think we're really blessed to have people with engineering minds who can analyze it in that way. I'm just going to ask everybody, we started a little late because we just kind of dragged a little bit before. We had beautiful presentations. We're going to stop promptly at 2:05, but I want to get a quick question in for Madhvacarya and then maybe try to get one in for Yugal before we end. And just very briefly, Madhvacarya Prabhu, one of the questions that came up was you mentioned your brother who you used to debate with and how he convinced you. If that brother is still with us, if he's still alive, what's the nature of your debating today? How's your philosophical conversations with him evolved? Have they over the years?
Well, he's my oldest brother, and he's materially one of the most intelligent men I've ever met in my life. And I've been around a lot of smart guys, but he's extremely intelligent, and he became a college professor at University of Tennessee, and just a great, always been a fantastic debater. And he became addicted to cocaine and died of a cocaine overdose.
Oh, Krishna.
So this is just to say that intelligence in and of itself it can be nice if it's used in the service of devotional service, but otherwise, I just read a study recently that said that, because there's a lot of debate about facts and how to convince people of facts. And you would think that the more intelligent you are, the more you can be swayed by a factual argument. But actually, studies have shown that the more intelligent you are, the more adept you are at manipulating facts to support your own preconceived notions. Do you understand what I'm saying? So intelligence isn't really, it doesn't really help you to be more open-minded and accepting. It's just makes you a better manipulator unless it's grounded in something a little more substantial. And so, so just to show you that, and if intelligence isn't grounded in morality and spiritual principle, universal spiritual principle, then it can just take you to, more depths to deeper depths of despair.